In the quiet suburb of Elmwood, where nothing much happened, lived Roger and Amanda Harlow, a seemingly perfect couple. Roger, 46, was a successful real estate developer with a keen eye for business, while Amanda, 32, was a former model who had given up her career to support Roger and their 2 children, aged 8 and 10. They lived in a spacious, elegant house on Maple Avenue, and to outsiders, they had everything: wealth, beauty, and a picture-perfect family life. But behind closed doors, their marriage was anything but perfect. Roger was often away on business trips, leaving Amanda lonely and isolated. Over time, the emotional distance between them grew, and Amanda found herself feeling trapped in a gilded cage, yearning for affection and excitement. It was during one of these lonely spells that Amanda met a local taxi driver, Jack Callahan. Jack was the opposite of Roger in every way. Rugged, charming, and a little rough around the edges, he brought a thrill into Amanda's monotonous life. It all began innocently enough. Amanda would often call Jack's cab service when she needed to go to town, and they would chat during the short rides. But soon, their conversations became deeper, more personal. Jack made Amanda feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. One rainy evening, after a particularly heated argument with Roger over his prolonged absence from home, Amanda impulsively called Jack. He arrived quickly, sensing something was wrong. They drove around aimlessly, with Amanda pouring out her heart to him. Jack listened intently, offering comfort and understanding. That night, their relationship crossed a line they could never step back from. They began meeting secretly, using Jack's cab as their private hideaway. They would park in secluded spots, hidden from prying eyes, where they would talk, laugh, and eventually succumb to their forbidden desires. Amanda felt alive again, and for a brief time, she believed she could keep her 2 lives separate, but small towns have a way of uncovering secrets. It wasn't long before whispers began circulating in Elmwood. People noticed Amanda's frequent cab rides and the lingering glances between her and Jack. Rumors spread like wildfire, reaching Roger's ears. At first, he dismissed them as idle gossip, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and Roger's suspicions grew. He began to monitor Amanda's movements more closely, hiring a private investigator to follow her. It wasn't long before he received the damning evidence he had dreaded: photographs of Amanda and Jack in a passionate embrace. Roger was furious, his pride wounded, but he didn't confront Amanda immediately. Instead, he plotted his revenge. The tension between Roger and Jack escalated. Roger's anger simmered beneath the surface, while Amanda remained oblivious to the dangerous game being played around her. She continued her affair with Jack, unaware of the storm brewing. But everything changed on the night of November 14th, 2019. Roger returned home early from a business trip, surprising Amanda. She was caught off guard, and her nervousness was palpable. Roger suggested they go out for dinner to discuss their marriage. Relieved, Amanda agreed, thinking he might finally be ready to work on their relationship. However, Roger had no intention of mending their broken marriage. He had meticulously planned every detail of what would unfold that night. As they drove towards the outskirts of town, Roger insisted on taking a detour, claiming he wanted to show her a new property he was considering purchasing. Amanda, feeling uneasy but not wanting to argue, agreed. They arrived at a remote, abandoned building, far from any witnesses. As they stepped out of the car, Roger turned to her, his face a mask of calm rage. "I know about you and Jack," he said coldly. Amanda's heart stopped, her mind racing for an explanation. But before she could say anything, Roger handed her a phone. "Call him," he demanded, his voice deadly calm. "Tell him to come here, alone." Amanda hesitated, fear gripping her, but Roger's eyes were filled with a terrifying resolve. Trembling, she dialed Jack's number. He picked up almost immediately, his voice warm and concerned. Amanda tried to keep her voice steady as she asked him to meet her at the location Roger had chosen. Jack, sensing something was wrong, hesitated but eventually agreed, his love for Amanda blinding him to the danger ahead. As he drove towards the remote building, his mind raced with possibilities. He had no idea that he was heading into a deadly trap that would change everything. Jack arrived at the remote location a little past midnight. The building loomed ominously in the darkness, its silhouette barely visible under the faint moonlight. He stepped out of his cab, glancing around nervously, his heart pounding. He didn't see Amanda anywhere. Instead, Roger stood there, his posture tense, his eyes fixed on Jack with a cold intensity. "Where's Amanda?" Jack demanded, his voice laced with anxiety. Roger took a step closer, his hand casually slipping into his jacket pocket. "She's inside," he said calmly, nodding towards the building. "We need to talk." Sensing danger, but driven by his concern for Amanda, Jack hesitated for a moment before following Roger into the building. The interior was dark and damp, the air heavy with the scent of mold and decay. Roger led Jack down a narrow corridor, the silence between them thick with unspoken threats. They reached an empty room at the back of the building. It was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. Amanda was there, sitting on the floor, her face pale and tear-streaked. Her hands were tied behind her back, her mouth gagged. She looked up at Jack, her eyes wide with fear. Jack's heart sank. What the hell is this? Roger? He shouted, rushing towards Amanda, but before he could reach her, Roger pulled a gun from his jacket and pointed it directly at Jack. Step back, Roger ordered, his voice calm but firm. Jack froze, his eyes darting between the gun and Amanda. You don't want to do this, Roger. Let her go. This is between you and me. Roger chuckled, a chilling sound that echoed through the empty room. You think you can come into my life, steal my wife, and just walk away? He shook his head slowly. No, Jack, you've ruined my life, and now I'm going to ruin yours. He motioned with the gun towards a small table in the corner. On it lay a syringe filled with a clear liquid, and beside it, a length of rope. Jack's stomach churned as he realized what Roger had planned. You're insane, Jack whispered, his voice barely audible. Roger's eyes flashed with anger. Maybe I am, he said softly, his grip tightening on the gun, but I'm not stupid. You see, I know exactly how to make this look like you two planned to run away together, but things went wrong. A tragic lover's quarrel that ended in murder. He walked over to the table, picked up the syringe, and held it up to the light. This is a potent mix of sedatives, enough to knock out a horse. I'll inject you both, tie you up, and let you die slowly. By the time the police find you, it'll be too late. Jack's mind raced, desperately searching for a way out. He had to get the gun away from Roger, but one wrong move could mean the end for both him and Amanda. He glanced at Amanda, who was shaking her head frantically, her eyes pleading with him to stay calm. Roger, please, you don't have to do this. Jack tried to reason, his voice steady despite the fear gripping his heart. I know I've hurt you, but killing us won't solve anything. It'll only ruin your life even more. Roger sneered, his face twisted with rage. You think I care about my life anymore? He moved closer to Jack, the syringe poised in his hand. You're going to pay for what you've done. In a desperate attempt to disarm Roger, Jack lunged forward, grabbing his wrist and struggling to wrestle the gun away. The two men grappled, the gun waving wildly between them as they fought. Amanda screamed through her gag, her eyes wide with terror as she watched the struggle. Suddenly, there was a deafening bang. The gun went off, the sound echoing through the empty building. Both men froze, staring at each other in shock. Jack felt a sharp, searing pain in his side and staggered back, his hand clutching his abdomen. Blood seeped through his fingers, and he collapsed to his knees. Roger stood there, panting, the gun still smoking in his hand. He looked at Jack, who was gasping for breath, his face pale. For a moment, it seemed like Roger was about to shoot again, but then he stopped, his gaze shifting to Amanda. See what you made me do, Roger shouted, his voice breaking with emotion. This is all your fault, Amanda. He turned back to Jack, who was barely conscious, and aimed the gun at his headbutt before he could pull the trigger. There was a sudden loud crash from behind. The door burst open, and several police officers stormed into the room, their weapons drawn. Drop the gun, one of them shouted. Roger hesitated for a split second, his eyes filled with despair. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he lowered the gun and let it fall to the ground. The officers rushed forward, pinning him to the floor and handcuffing him. Two paramedics hurried to Jack's side, quickly assessing his condition. Amanda sobbed with relief as they cut the ropes binding her and removed the gag from her mouth. She rushed to Jack, holding his hand as the paramedics worked to stabilize him. Stay with me, Jack, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Please, stay with me. Jack managed a weak smile, his eyes fluttering closed as the darkness closed in around him. The last thing he heard was Amanda's voice, calling his name before everything went black. Jack awoke in the hospital, his body weak and bandaged, but alive. Amanda was by his side, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She reached for his hand as soon as he stirred, squeezing it gently. You're safe now, Jack, she whispered, her voice trembling. It's over. They've arrested Roger. But it wasn't over. As the police delved deeper into Roger's actions that night, a disturbing sequence of events came to light. Roger, driven by his rage and humiliation, had planned the murder with meticulous precision. The syringe he intended to use on Jack and Amanda was filled with a cocktail of sedatives and paralytics, enough to ensure they would be conscious but unable to move as they suffocated slowly. Bound and helpless, the police found detailed notes and a timeline in Roger's office, outlining his entire plan. Lured Jack to the remote building, drugged them both, and staged the scene to look like a murder-suicide born out of jealousy and betrayal. He intended to make it appear as though Jack, distraught over being unable to have Amanda for himself, had killed her in a fit of rage and then taken his own life. As Jack lay recovering in the hospital, the grim details of Roger's plan were relayed to him by Detective Sarah Mills, the lead investigator on the case. It's a miracle you're alive, Jack, she said. her tone serious. "If we hadn't received that anonymous tip about Roger's intentions, we might have been too late." Jack frowned, confused. "Anonymous tip? Who knew about this?" Detective Mills shook her head. "We're still trying to trace the call, but someone knew exactly what Roger was planning and called it in just as he lured you out there. They told us where to find you, but didn't give a name." Amanda's eyes widened. "It must have been one of his business associates," she suggested. "Someone who knew Roger well enough to be suspicious." But the identity of the caller remained a mystery, one of the few loose ends in the case. With Roger behind bars, charged with attempted murder, kidnapping, and multiple other offenses, the community of Elmwood slowly began to return to normal. Roger's trial was swift and heavily publicized. Despite his lawyer's attempts to argue temporary insanity brought on by the shock of his wife's infidelity, the overwhelming evidence against him sealed his fate. Witnesses from his company testified to his erratic behavior in the weeks leading up to the incident, and the meticulously detailed notes found in his office left no doubt about his intentions. Roger was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but even as justice was served, the scars of that night remained. Amanda, traumatized by the ordeal, left Elmwood, moving to a different state with her children to start over. She and Jack parted ways amicably, realizing that their relationship had been born out of desperation and loneliness, and was now tainted by the darkness of what had happened. Jack returned to his life, but he was a changed man. He sold his taxi business and moved to a quieter town, hoping to leave the memories of that night behind. But some things are impossible to forget. The image of Roger's crazed eyes, the sound of the gunshot, and the cold realization that he had almost lost his life haunted him in his dreams. Months later, as Jack sat in his small apartment, staring out at the rain-soaked street, he received an unexpected letter. It was from an anonymous sender with no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper on which was written only a few words. "You were lucky. Next time, be careful who you trust." A chill ran down Jack's spine. He looked around, feeling an inexplicable sense of dread. Who had saved him that night? And why were they watching him now? As he crumpled the letter in his hand, he realized that some mysteries might never be solved, and some dangers, once averted, could still be lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike.